Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. Obviously, the big topic of today, which we've seen over the last couple days, really 2-3 days, has been the Ross Dellinger report about the total control of the Big Ten and the SEC. But in this stage and in this episode today, we're going to talk about a little bit of Commissioner Jim Phillips of the ACC, what he's done right, and where they need to go, and why this is the last stand for the ACC and potentially even the Big 12 as they go into the latter portion of the 2020s in terms of 2025 through 2031, and why this is such a crucial time for both those conferences, but more importantly, the ACC. Before we get started, obviously, the show is sponsored by Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. Tremendous people, obviously two great Pitt men, but more importantly, the great customer service they provide to each one of their customers. You guys have seen the links I tweeted out, the pictures, plenty of different selections there at Colonial Beer. Tremendous people, but even better customer service. Make sure you go see them today at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. But also, too, the show is sponsored by Thompson Law Group with Brian Thompson, an attorney on your side. Right now, with many people struggling with the economy and rising costs, they're helping many people and businesses with their debts. And they're offering free telephone consultations to assess all options available to those who are struggling, no matter the type of amount of debt they are in. You can reach them at 724-799-8404 or reach them at thompsonattorney.com. Again, Brian Thompson, another great individual. The amount of work he does in the community for people and himself, beyond himself, but the amount of work he puts in for you, the customer. It depends on, especially when you look at other larger law firms, they look at you as a number. They don't treat you the same as they do certain clients. With Brian, he treats all of his clients the same because each one of you are very important to him, but more importantly, the results that you need to be successful in the case that you currently have. Obviously, Brian's a tremendous individual, comes from a great family, has a great family, a person you can trust, but more importantly, he'll get the results that you need. Again, reach out to him at 724-799-8404 or visit him at thompsonattorney.com. Again, as we get into it today, obviously today, why Commissioner Jim Phillips? This is the last stand. And again, I've written down a number of different things through different parts of research, obviously through the ACC, as you guys obviously know, for people who follow me, between the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, even the Group of Five, but also to the ACC. Root for Pitt, obviously, but why it's so important for the ACC, but even the Big 12. But as we look today as the ACC, when you look at Commissioner Jim Phillips, some of the stuff that he's done good, I thought, overall, that people looked at and might have said, hey, I don't like it, especially when it comes to ESPN, when it comes to conference realignment. You look at overall things like adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU. Obviously, SMU has been a better portioned team. I think Cal had a number of different successes in the 2024 season. Obviously, Stanford's going through a number of different transitions and turnover, rebuilding that team. But Cal had a number of good instances. Stanford is certainly rebuilding. But SMU, obviously, making it to the ACC championship game, going to the college football playoff. Yes, losing in the first round, but in the first year going from Group of Five to the ACC is quite a testament to them. But more importantly, you're into that number of different markets. Obviously, the Texas market, I think he's done a great job with that. It certainly added them in there where SMU's not taking any distributions, which is huge for the ACC because it adds more money to the other teams that are there over this duration of the actual deal. Between now until 2031, $700 million of infused money, new money, is going into the ACC. The ACC network has been a massive impact. Obviously, that was before Jim Phillips, but he's done a good job of promoting it and making sure that they've actually adapted. They've added more money. I think that overall, I think the production of the ACC network can be a lot better. I think they got good people on there. Eric McElwain, I think, does a really good job. EJ Manuel. But there's some certain people that you like to see on there more often than not. Obviously, they got a number of different good shows, but they need to do a better job of promoting that because the ACC has a half share in that channel. So the better it does, the more money that those teams get. Obviously, the ESPN extension recently to 2036. I don't think we make it to 2036. I think 2031 is that time you'll start to see a lot of change because I think that'll be the last year, the last time we see major realignment happen at 2031 because the buyout to leave the ACC will be lowered. But also, too, what does it look like in terms of all the four conferences move together? Do they stay together? Do they create their own league? Obviously, conversations about breaking out of the NCAA and creating their own league have been a massive discussion going forward. But he's done a good job at that. And then obviously, too, the Clemson and FSU lawsuits look to be coming to a close. They really do believe they're going to be able to go through negotiations to lower the buyout if they wanted to leave. I still say to this point, as we've seen from a number of different angles, FSU does not have a place to go. People think that they'd be more than likely to go to the Big Ten because the SEC already has Florida. Florida does not want Florida State in the conference. You've seen a lot of that. Same thing with Clemson and South Carolina. They don't want that there. So the only option they would have is the Big Ten. And I really don't think they want to go there either. I think right now, when you look at the ACC overall with the potential automatic bids, and we'll talk about those and what that means, I think they're better options to stay in the ACC because of the two aspects of how this has changed, which was big to them. One, the brand engagement. The brand, obviously, the brand fund, which is basically if you have the most viewership in the ACC, you're going to get more funds. Basically, if your team does a good job of viewership, you'll get more money. Also, too, the success initiatives. Why that's important, you get more money if you win. And personally, too, I like that. Also, I think that's going to actually end up going to multiple different conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten, because why does Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia want to share money with Mississippi State, Ole Miss? You've got Arkansas in there, Vanderbilt. Why would they want to share that much money with them? I think that the top echelon teams like Georgia, Texas, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, you've got those teams at the top forefront, Tennessee, that will really get more money as they start to win and start to produce more in those ranges. The same thing goes with the Big Ten. Why does Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon want to share money with certain teams like Rutgers? When you look at Rutgers, obviously, who has been ranked as the worst conference realignment addition because there's just massive downfall and lack of success. Same thing with Northwestern. Why would they want to share it with Northwestern or Minnesota, potentially even Wisconsin, Iowa? Why would you want to share that money with them when the larger brand teams in that conference would want more money? That's something that could be able to talk about another day, but I think that eventually comes down the pipe eventually. But here's why. Here's why I think that Commissioner Phillips needs to push back. As we go into this next phase of conference realignment from 2025 to 2031, when that time comes, you're watching a lot of this in live time with now the SEC and the Big Ten now being able to go into the new year in 2026 when the new conference, the new playoff comes apart, where really the SEC and the Big Ten have the most power. They're the only two conferences that really say in terms of what happens when it comes to the college football playoff. This needs to be a pushback. And, there have been a number of different things that I look at in Commissioner Jim Phillips' time that you look at and you say, what the hell were you possibly doing in this time period? Also, too, the not just the qualifiers, obviously, it just, for me, it devalues the regular season. If you have four automatic bids from one conference, that really truly means that when your non-conference schedule no longer means anything, because as long as you're in the top four in your conference, you're going to make the college football playoff. The ACC only getting two as a power conference, the Big 12 only getting two as a power conference, I think is pretty much a joke at this point, because if anything, if you wanted to have automatic qualifiers, the SEC and the Big 10 shouldn't have more than three. But still, the only qualifiers, the automatic qualifiers I would have, and Jim Phillips needs to do a better job at this. I know he's said personally that he does not want any automatic qualifiers, which I disagree with. I think the automatic qualifiers should just be for the conference champions. And it doesn't mean that you get a bye. It doesn't mean that automatically, you're given a bye in terms of what it looks like going forward. Now, obviously, if it expands to 16 teams, there won't be any buys anyways. But an automatic qualifier should only be for winning your conference. Okay, obviously the Big 10 has 9 conference games. The Big 12 has 9 conference games. Then you look at the SEC, 8 conference games. The ACC, 8 conference games. Obviously, because the SEC and the ACC certainly have a number of different rivals between both of those two conferences. The out-of-conference schedule certainly fits together well with them. When you look at, obviously, like Louisville and Kentucky, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, Florida State and Florida. You certainly have, obviously, Miami will face Florida, especially, too, just because they have their time periods. Obviously, Miami did a good job winning that game this year, being extremely dominant. But overall, when you're looking at both of these, the only automatic qualifiers, in my opinion, should be just the conference champions. And I think Commissioner Jim Phillips needs to start acting better in terms of leadership. He needs to get out in front and start leading. Because a number of different times I've talked about the good things he's done, He's been very lackluster in terms of pushing the agenda that the ACC currently needs. Also, too, I thought he was too lackadaisical in the beginning when it came to the Florida State and Clemson debacle. Clemson was more quiet about it. I know North Carolina is doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but obviously Florida State really got a really big mouth in terms of pushing the certain agenda that they wanted to leave the ACC. Commissioner Jim Phillips should have done a better job at shutting that stuff down very quickly. And I think right now the opportunity for him to push back is huge, because giving over the power to the SEC and the Big Ten, while their conversation certainly says that we've heard numerous reports that the SEC and the Big Ten have talked about, leaving the NCAA, but also too leaving the Big 12 and the ACC. By all means, go ahead and do it. And here's why I'm telling Commissioner Jim Phillips to call their bluff. You have to realize, if those two conferences go off and do their own thing, and you alienate the rest of the country between those two different conferences, I got news for you. You're going to start to majority lose the viewership overall, and it's going to hurt your money. Obviously, we saw this year between the college football schedule in terms of the playoff and the NFL. The NFL absolutely dominated the time in terms of viewership, but also viewership between the two different leagues. The NFL is still the massive factor. The dominance, whether it's on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, doesn't matter. NFL will always be over college football. You need to attract as many people as possible. When you involve all four and really the group of five to allow them in, obviously the one group of five champion, you're allowing yourself to maximize the time periods of being able to involve the rest of the country. The rest of the country feels involved. You're adding more viewership. If you're taking that away and you go off and do your own thing, by all means, have at it. But then over time, that's a bad business move, because you're going to lose more money. That's a fact. When people, especially to the average college football fan, unlike people like myself, where I love college football, I watch everything. That's why I talk about it here. Overall, the average college football fan roots for their team, and that's it. They feel comfortable watching those football games because their team had a shot and they lost those games and they weren't able to compete. They tried their best. They weren't able to get there. People then watch those games. But when you officially eliminate those teams, and if you have two different playoffs, two different national champions from each conference, they're not going to watch any of those games. These four conferences should be working together. And the Big Ten and the SEC have the most revenue of any of the four conferences. They have all the advantages. And the reason why they're pushing for more is because they felt like Alabama should be in. Well, Alabama, for that instance, should probably not have lost to Oklahoma, a 6-6 Oklahoma team, and a 6-6 or 7-5 Vanderbilt team. Those were two games that they should have certainly won. Oklahoma obviously destroyed Alabama. Alabama couldn't even score a touchdown in that game. You need to win those games. And that also gets back to the qualifiers. If you're not winning those games, it's almost like a 7-5 SEC team could get into the playoff because they could lose all their non-conference games but still end up in the top four, because as long as they're in the top four, they make the playoff. So it's multiple debacles. Another thing that, again, Commissioner Jim Phillips needs to do a better job of. When you give all the power to the P2, which is, in my opinion, obviously, it's the P2 in terms of revenue. You look at the Big Ten and the SEC. You saw this past year. I thought, SMU did a good job in the first half against Penn State, and it really got out of hand. Kevin Jennings obviously did not do a good job at all during that game, and really SMU's defense was holding on to them. Clemson did a really good job competing. Obviously, it was a good game against Texas. Arizona State certainly held their ground. It wasn't really a game for 3.5 quarters, but they came back around towards the end of the fourth quarter. A couple bad calls against them. Potentially, they beat Texas. But you saw in the national championship game, Notre Dame in the championship and Ohio State in the championship. While Notre Dame really didn't compete in overall in the national championship, I don't think that the SEC, while I still believe it's the number one conference, is not as far ahead as what people really think. And the same thing goes with the Big Ten. The Big Ten has now won the last two national championships, which is good, because before that, the Big Ten did nothing. Obviously, in terms of before that, you saw back in 2014, obviously, when Ohio State won a national title with Urban Meyer, Cardell Jones. You remember all those guys. It was a really good football team overall. But down to the debate, I think college football, when you look at it from an aspect, it's very clear that there's a lot of parity in college football because, one, the transfer portal, but also, two, NIL. You saw previous domination of the SEC because the SEC was paying players while other conferences, while the top echelon teams were paying guys under the table. Now it's every team paying players. And now The parity across college football is currently there. But Commissioner Jim Phillips needs to do a better job. He needs to be able to push back. Obviously, too, when you look at all of the across the board, when you look at these other teams, he needs to put his foot down and say, hey, we're not allowing everyone to take power over us. We need to call their bluff. And again, Jim Phillips has been really absent for the majority of the time. I've talked about the good things he's done, but guess what? There's been plenty of bad. Sitting on the sidelines, not having enough conversation, not getting in front of people and saying that the ACC, in terms of other conferences, is in third in revenue, third in terms of revenue. But when you look at overall scheduling, they schedule the out of conference. The SEC certainly loves to play their Citadel, loves to play their Sam Houston State. That's great. But the commissioner needs to stand up and do a better job overall pushing the agenda of the ACC. It's that simple. And too many times we've seen him on the sidelines not saying anything. And now potentially we're getting news that giving power to the SEC and the Big Ten to collectively make decisions, it can't happen. You cannot allow the SEC and the Big Ten to get 4 qualifiers while you only get 2. There needs to be pure dialogue about why the automatic qualifiers are not a good sense. We've also seen a number of different teams and different conferences in terms of the SEC, potentially the ACC, also doing a tournament before the actual playoff. That devalues the regular season. The gimmicks are certainly not there. College football fans want to see the regular game that we've seen for over years, the regular games. No gimmicks, just pure college football and involving multiple people around the country. The SEC and the Big Ten have the power right now. They could certainly drop the hammer at any point, but that doesn't mean they should because it's not the best thing for the game. There's still plenty of revenue to be made. We've certainly heard, especially conversations about the SEC and the Big Ten going to a schedule agreement, potentially untapped money and revenue there. That's understandable. But overall, when it comes to automatic bids, Commissioner Jim Phillips cannot allow it to be a 4-4-2-2-1 setup. It's good for the group of 5 because you always have one team in there. You certainly don't have a team in there all the time. You certainly have to fight for it. In the 4-team playoff, you were never going to get a team in there besides Cincinnati that one year. Jim Phillips needs to provide leadership, and he's lacked it on a number of different areas, but that certainly needs to happen now. He needs to stand up and push against this 4-4-2-2-1 system and get it down to at least a 3-2-2, 3-3-2-2-1, or just straight across the board, qualifiers just for the conference champions, and then you pick the best teams after that. Qualified, automatic qualifiers, conference champions, and then you pick the best teams after that, get it to 16 teams, no buys, and boom, you land right into the tournament. That's what I think. And right now, the SEC and the Big Ten want to have a channeling of another change in the 2025 setup. This is your leverage right here. Get out in front and have a conversation and say, no, we're not changing anything unless we get concessions back for the future in 2026 through 2031. It's that simple. And Jim Phillips needs to do a better job. And the same thing with Brett Yormark. But I think Jim Phillips has been too much on the sidelines in terms of leading the ACC. Down in the comments, obviously, down below, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Obviously, we're going to be doing more and more ACC broad college football content. Make sure you guys give it a follow, subscribe, and like. More importantly, leave the comment down below. Do you think Commissioner Jim Phillips has done a good job, a bad job? But also, too, what do you want to see Commissioner Jim Phillips do that needs to be better? What does he need to do to keep the ACC in contact? But more importantly, in a position where they're still at the table to have a conversation with the SEC and the Big Ten. I'd like to hear your comments, obviously, down below. Guys, as always and forever, hail to Pitt, and hail to the ACC, and hail to college football. I'll see you guys next time.